FromSoft games in general, and Souls games in particular, have the reputation of being difficult. This is taken to the point that some players are too intimidated to even try the games in the first place. As a very passionate fan of these games, I always found this to be an extremely unfortunate scenario. After a lot of consideration, I believe that one of the biggest reasons why the game is so difficult for some players is because they are not making the correct decisions when they level up their characters. These players put levels in the wrong stats, or they do so wildly with no organization. In essence, the game is harder for these players because they are not running a proper build. This is not their fault. Souls games, in general, do not provide a lot of guidance on how to make a proper build, and there is so much information up front that it is easy for a new player to get overwhelmed. The truth is that if players make a proper build, the game would be easier, especially on the first playthrough. Now, please understand that I do not mean that builds should be perfect or min-maxed straight away for the first playthrough. That being said, if you go into the game with the right tools, you will have a much higher chance of success. In this video, I want to give every Souls player the tools that they need to be able to create a proper build straight away on their first playthrough. I want to do this especially for the new players, for those that Elden Ring will be the first Souls games that they play. To me, seeing the Souls games get more players is an absolute pleasure, and I want to give them the best chance of survival so that they can stick around and discover the beauty that is the Souls. We are going to do this by giving the necessary information to make a build, by understanding what to look for when making a build, and also by understanding the philosophy of building, so that each and every player can create the builds that they want to play. Please understand that to do this, I will have to use information of the game that might constitute spoilers. Most of this video will contain light spoilers by showing footage of the closed network test. That being said, one of the later parts will contain heavier spoilers. Consider this a warning. If you want to go into Elden Ring completely fresh and unspoiled, I really appreciate your company, but this is the time to turn back. For a final note, I will say that there is a lot of content to be covered in this video. I want to make sure that everything is understood and clearly explained. For this reason, I have set timestamps in the description of this video in order to make it easier for you, the viewer, to navigate the content and go straight to the information that you're looking for. And so, how do we make a build? Let's get started. It may sound obvious or useless, but in order to do something, we have to understand what it is. You will be surprised by the amount of players that do not understand what a build is. Once again, this is not their fault. No one explained to them what it is. They just see the numbers, try to copy them, and play the game. But to be able to make the builds that you want to play, you need to understand what this constitutes. In essence, a build is a combination of statistics that allow your character to do a specific series of things. There are an infinite number of build possibilities, and they all try to achieve something different. The statistical combination will always change depending on the objective that you want to achieve. If you want to be a melee character, your build will be drastically different than if you want to be a caster character. What your character can do, and how well it can do these things, depend on how well your different stats work together to reach this objective. In this sense, a build is very much like clockwork. All pieces must be in their place, otherwise the system falls apart. A build functions by allowing your character to be irrefutably good at something. Again, if you run a melee character, it will be good at using weapons, and if you run a caster character, it will be good at using spells. The function that a build brings is to allow you to always have an answer to a problem that your character is good at. If you do not make a proper build, you will have a character that can do many different things, but none of them effectively. You will have answers, but none of them would be good. In these situations, you may feel like you are stuck. On the other hand, with a proper build, your character will be able to do a reduced, smaller amount of things. That being said, it will do them in a very efficient way. In this case, you have less answers to your problems, but they are all good answers. Some builds will be better at doing certain things than others. Sometimes some builds may even be straight out better than others. That is the life when it comes to the meta. That being said, all builds work the same. By specializing in just a few characteristics, your character is able to be better at them. Sure, some bosses will be easier if you use spells, and some bosses will be easier if you use weapons. Some bosses are weaker to some strategies, while others are weaker to different ones. This is the life of the Souls. A single build cannot do everything, but, at the very least, it will be very good at what it actually does. This increases your sense of security, which, in turn, increases your chances of success. Being able to make a proper build is extremely important. Having a character that is very good at a few things will provide you, the player, with a comfort zone, where you will always have a few answers or a few strategies that you can try against every situation. Sometimes things will go better, and other times they will go worse, but at least you have a few tactics to rely on. This reduces the amount of stress and anxiety that a player can experience because no matter what shows up behind the fog gate, you can always rely on your build. When it comes to Souls games, you need two things to be able to succeed. You need the statistics, your build, and you need your execution, your player skill. If we have the statistics side taken care of with a proper build, then we only have to worry about understanding the game mechanics, practicing them, and increasing our player skill. A proper build can constitute 50% of what you need to succeed. That is too important to ignore. Once we know what a build is, we need to make one. In order to create the proper build, there is one thing that always goes first. You need an idea. A build idea can be anything. It can be as vague as, I want to make a Dex character. Or it can be as specific as, I want to make the best build for this weapon. Regardless of how detailed or not your idea is, the most important thing is that you have one and that it is clear. An idea is the canvas that we will work from, and everything that happens afterwards depends on it. Be careful not to confuse a build idea with a build objective. For example, I want to make a build that makes the game easy. That is not a build idea. That is a build objective, and it can be achieved in many different ways. Maybe the game can be made easy by increasing your health and defense to ridiculous levels. Or maybe it can be made easy by cheesing the bosses with some spells. Both of these things require very different builds. Remember that a build idea needs to be something that you want your character to do, not what you want the game to be. Once you have your build idea, you need to meet the minimum requirements for the key aspects of this build. You need to make sure that you meet the requirements for the weapons that you want to use. The same goes for spells. You need to meet the requirements to cast them. You need to make sure that you have enough MP to use the different spells and skills that you need, as well as make sure that you have enough health and stamina to be able to execute the actions that your build requires. No matter what build you choose to make, they always have a minimum amount of needs that must be covered. Take care of these first. The next step is to make a very important choice. Do you prefer comfort or damage? Once you have met the minimum requirements for your build, you will have to use the remaining skill points that you have to either maximize your damage or maximize your comfort. Maybe you can put a few less points in health in order to increase your weapon damage. Maybe you can put a few less points in stamina in order to increase your MP or increase your spell scaling. Maybe you want to invest a bit more into equip load so that you can wear heavier armor that will protect you more. Or maybe you plan to run naked so you don't need equip load at all. Whether you're the type of player that prefers to deal more damage over safety, or on the contrary, you're the type of player that believes that it is more important to stay alive, everyone must make this choice, because it will dictate where your additional skill points will go. At this point, you have your idea. you have met the minimum requirements of your build, and you also decided whether you want this build to be more offensive or defensive. Perfect. Now, we need to min-max. The term min-max is defined as a system in which we try to find a way to obtain the maximum amount of benefit through the minimum amount of investment. In this step, we take a look at diminishing returns. We take a look at the different classes to see which one would give us the most soul levels for the specific stats that we are looking for. And, of course, we take a look at weapon scaling to see how much damage we can squeeze out of them with each skill point that we spend. This is the most important part of a build, and it requires the highest amount of work. This usually means that you're trying different things, running different calculations, and testing multiple damage values in order to find out where you should put each and every point that you have available. This step requires a lot of patience, but this is where most of the power of your build will come from. I am sure that you have noticed that at times it is difficult to follow these steps one by one. You're not wrong. In fact, I do not recommend that you do this one step at a time. Once you have the idea of your build set, everything you do in order to create it happens simultaneously. You are constantly looking at different weapons, trying to meet different requirements. You are constantly flipping back and forth between damage and comfort in order to find the perfect balance, and when it comes to min-maxing, you are definitely putting points in and taking points out of every single stat, trying to get every single, once again, advantage possible. All of this happens at once. When we are making a build, all of this is done simultaneously, and each step affects the others. It is not uncommon to go back and forth constantly, and even changing the build idea as new things and situations arise. While this may sound scary, don't worry. The more builds you make, the easier it gets. Eventually, most of this will be automatic and you will be able to get the theory of the build running in just a few minutes. Getting there is where the hard work is, but once you are there, you will get the feeling that these builds are making themselves. Of course, in order to achieve all of this, we need a lot of game knowledge. We need to know what weapons are in the game, what their requirements are, what their mechanics are, where they are located. We need to know how the stats work, their soft caps and hard caps. We need to know the different classes and their stat distribution, as well as which stats we are not going to be using at all in order to be able to pick the most efficient class. Also, we need to know what soul level we are going to. Is the meta still the usual soul level 120? That is a very important part of making a build. Game knowledge does not come easy. It requires a lot of playtime and repetition, but I will say it again, it is needed. The more you know about the game, the more combinations that you can think of. The more you know about the game, the better you can min-max. And finally, the more you know about the game, the quicker that these builds will be making themselves. I am sure that by now, my dear viewer, you are thinking, if we need this much knowledge to make a proper build, how can we achieve it on the first playthrough? You're not wrong. When it comes to the first playthrough, we have to do things differently, and that is exactly what we're going to cover next. When you play Elden Ring for the first time, or any other Souls games for that matter, we do not have all of the information and knowledge required to make a proper min-max build immediately. This is normal. We obtain the knowledge through the experience of playing the game multiple times. That being said, there are still steps that we can take and a system that we can follow in order to make a proper build that will not let us down while we go through the game for the very first time. There is a combination of recommendations that you can follow that will make your first experience with Elden Ring that much more comfortable. Again, we are trying to avoid making the game harder by eliminating any possible mistakes when we level up. One thing does not change, and that is the fact that you need an idea. Even when we play the game for the very first time and we know very little about it, even when Elden Ring might be our very first Souls game, we still need to have a basic idea of what we want. In this case, the idea can be vague and flexible. For example, a strength build. This is a very basic idea that establishes which way we will be playing the game. Strength build means that we are most likely going to be a melee character and that we are most likely going to be using heavier armor. Another example is Faith build. This tells us that we want a caster character and that we're probably going to need a good amount of MP. All of this will determine which stats we need to level up. As you can see, even with a very basic idea, we already have a lot of ground covered. Once you have your basic concept, your basic idea of what you want to do on your first playthrough, we need to pick a class. When we are running a Souls games for the first time, picking a class depends on what stats you are looking for or what the starting equipment is. At this point, we do not know much about the game. We do not know which class is the best for which build. We are making this choice for the first time, so we are forced to make it with the upfront face value information that the game gives us. Obviously, we're going to pick a class that best goes with our idea. Going back to the strength build, we're probably going to want a class that has high strength, but also a good amount of health and stamina. It is also important to take a look at what weapons each class starts with. Sometimes it is better to pick a class that has less points in the stats we want, but instead starts the game with easier to use weapons. Even if we do not have all of the information that we need, we can still make an educated guess on what would work best. Once you have your idea and you picked your starting class, well, you're in the game. Now is when we need to make the tough decisions. As you play the game in advance, you will earn runes that you need to level up and buy items and equipment from merchants. Now, you have to make the choice of what to do with these runes. I have a few general tips that can help everyone obtain a better first experience. First, prioritize on leveling up your vigor and your endurance. I am serious, these two stats will give you more health and more stamina. This means that you can take more hits before you die. This also means that you will have more stamina for mobility and attacking. When you're just starting the game, it is a good idea to increase your chances of survival. Leveling up strength right away will make you deal more damage sooner, absolutely. That said, more damage is useless if you're already dead. Taking into consideration that this is a brand new game that we know nothing about, it is safe to assume that we're going to be making more than one mistake. It is a good idea to make sure that we do not die from just one or two mistakes. I would say level up vigor and endurance to about 15 each, maybe 20 if you feel like you need more. Once you do this, you can focus on your other needed stats without the worry of being one or two shotted by a particularly tough enemy. Now that you have your health and stamina in check, I would say to level up whichever stat you need to keep up with the requirements of your equipment. For example, if you're a melee character, you want to level up strength or dexterity to match the requirements of the different weapons that you want to use. On the other hand, if you're a caster, you want to do the same but with the requirements of the spells you want to cast. This way, you will be able to try out different weapons and spells before you commit to fully leveling up a stat to increase your damage. The worst thing that can happen to you is that you focus too much on one stat in order to increase your damage, and then you find a weapon or spell that you really like, but that uses a completely different stat altogether. Try not to spread yourself out too thin, but keep your options open. Remember, we are following an idea. So in the case of strength build, most of our points will go to strength, but this does not mean that we should not level up faith, for example, if we find a cool weapon that needs it. It is all about being flexible and keeping a balance. There are times when leveling up is not always the best use of your runes. In fact, when it comes to a first playthrough, leveling up may not be the recommended way of spending them. When you're going through the game for the first time, the most useful thing that you can do is experience different situations. For this reason, I believe that the best thing you can do is prioritize using your runes to buy weapons, upgrade weapons, buy spells, etc. Look at it this way. Maybe you can use your runes to level up twice. This will get you a few more AR points and as a result, you will do a few more points of damage. Or maybe you use those same runes to buy a few new weapons that you have not used yet, and when you try them out, you see that one of them has a really good moveset that resonates with you. Sure, you sacrifice a bit of damage or health depending on what you would have leveled up, but you gained a great weapon that you are comfortable with, and your experience has greatly improved. After all of this is said, you will still find yourself in situations where you are not sure what to spend your runes on, whether that is a weapon or leveling up a main stat, because you are unsure what the best course of action could be. Nevertheless, you still have to spend the runes because if you were to die, you would lose them all. This is a situation that you will face more than once in your first playthrough. It is normal and expected. Whenever I find myself in these types of doubts, I have a personal rule. When I do not know what is the best way to spend my runes, I spend them on health, stamina, or if you're a caster, MP. This means that if you're not sure what to use your runes on in Elden Ring, I recommend you level up Vigor, Endurance, or Mind, depending on what you need the most. Health, stamina, and MP are stats that are always needed. You can always use more health, more stamina, and more MP. You will never go wrong if you level these up in a moment of doubt. I will say this though, eventually, everyone needs to take a leap of faith. It is impossible to get through the whole first playthrough by always playing it safe. To summarize, if you're running Elden Ring for the first time and want to try to make a proper build, then you need to follow these steps. Have an idea, pick the appropriate class, level up Vigor and Endurance, maintain equipment requirements, prioritize getting new weapons and spells, and if you're in a situation of doubt, remember that you can never go wrong with leveling up Vigor, Endurance, or Mind. If you follow these guidelines, your experience should not be ruined by poor build decisions. That said, please understand that you will make some mistakes and that your build will not be perfect on your first playthrough. This is normal. Your first build is not supposed to be perfect. It is supposed to be enough to beat the game. Do not feel discouraged and do not enter a situation of analysis paralysis. You have to push forward. It will not be perfect, but do not worry. We have plenty of time for many other playthroughs to perfect our builds. At this time, please allow me to take a moment to repeat a very important message. In this final section of this video, I will show you a simple, basic, but very efficient system to create a build that is very close to being min-maxed, taking into consideration the information that we have available. With this system, you can go straight into a first playthrough of Elden Ring with an optimized build of your choosing. Not only will I show you this system, but I will also run an example by showing you exactly which build I will be personally running on my own first playthrough of the game. In order to do this, I have to use information that has been released, but that can be considered spoilers for some viewers. Specifically, I will be showing you the full list of every starting class in the game, alongside their full stat block and their starting equipment. With this information, I will show you how to optimize a basic build to give you the highest chance of success in your first playthrough of Elden Ring. As I mentioned, this information can be considered heavy spoilers. Please, if you do not want this information, this is as far as you should go. You have the right to go into this game fresh, and you have the right to figure out stuff on your own. Once again, I appreciate your company and your support, but in order to avoid spoilers, this is the time to click away. Thank you. If you're still here, I understand that you accept this information and I understand that you want to know how to create an optimized build to run your first Elden Ring playthrough. With this understanding, let's move on. What you see here is a full chart that I created with the information on all of Elden Ring's starting classes. Each class is organized in alphabetical order based on their names as they will appear in the game. You will see their starting level and each individual stat, alongside the equipment that they start the game with. You will notice that some stats are shaded in red. This means that this particular stat is the lowest that you can find among the starting classes. In the same manner, some stats are shaded in green. This means that this particular stat is the highest that you can find among the starting classes. So, Astrologer has the lowest strength at 8, for example, while Hero has the highest strength at 16. This applies to every other stat as well. Take a moment to pause the video if you need to, or take a screenshot if it helps you. so that you have the opportunity of studying this information and its implications. Meanwhile, I will make some basic observations that everyone needs to know. First, Hero and Vagabond look to be the best classes for strength, while Warrior and Samurai look to be the best classes for dexterity. Astrologer and Prisoner seem to be the best for intelligence and sorceries, while Confessor and Prophet seem to be the best for faith and miracles. Bandit has the highest arcane, while Vagabond has the lowest. We do not know much about arcane, so we do not know if this is a good stat or not. Only time will tell. With this information and some safe assumptions, we are able to plan ahead and create builds that can be optimized to be efficient and bring the highest chance of success on your first playthrough. Please note, optimized does not mean min-maxed. Optimized means that it does its thing very well. This is all that I am promising. These builds will do what they are meant to do very well, but they are not min-maxed. With that understood, let's make a build. As always, let's start with the basics. First of all, let's assume that the meta continues to be soul level 120. After that, we need an idea. What kind of builds can we make? Well, there are many different build types, but let's stick to the basics. Right away, we can build the following: strength, dexterity, sorceries, or miracles. Of course, we have the hybrid builds too: strength int, strength faith, dex int, dex faith, and quality. All of these are perfectly good choices for a first playthrough, and we can make all of them with relative ease. Each of these builds, each of these ideas, have a basic set of stats that we need to meet in order for the build to be successful. If you're building a pure strength or pure dexterity build, then you need 50 vigor for extra health, 40 endurance to get maximum stamina, and 40 in your main stat, strength or dex, in order to reach the soft cap for weapon scaling. These are basic melee builds that are reliable and easy to make. With a good chunk of health and maximum stamina, you will be able to go deep into enemy lines with your weapon of choice. Also, you will have leftover levels to put in other supporting stats. They are very good choices for a first playthrough. If you want to build a pure caster, be it sorceries or miracles, you need to run the following basic stats: 27 vigor to reach about 1000 HP, 30 mind for a good source of MP, 30 endurance for a fair amount of stamina, and 50 in your caster stat, be it int or faith, in order to maximize spell scaling. Since we need to put additional points into mind to get more MP for spells, we need to sacrifice some health and stamina. That being said, I still feel that these levels are good enough to survive while you deal massive damage with your castings. These builds are also relatively easy to make, but they have a bit more of a learning curve and they are a bit riskier. We are sacrificing some survivability for additional damage through spells. Maybe it's not the most beginner friendly, but they're not that hard to use either. Next, let's go over the hybrids. All of these builds, strength int, strength faith, dex int, and dex faith, share the same vigor and endurance. We want 40 in each in order to reach the soft cap for health and the maximum amount of stamina. After that, we want 40 points into the main physical stat, strength or dex, to once again reach the soft cap for weapon scaling, followed by 30 points in the secondary caster stat, int or faith. This is a fair amount to use as a support stat. These builds are my favorite, and they create a situation where you can get a bit of both worlds by being able to use multiple types of weapons in combinations with some support spells. It is also a good idea to put any leftover points in mind to get some more MP. Naturally, the most common combinations are strength faith and dex int, because they tend to synergize well with each other. Personally, I think that running strength int is blasphemy, but you do you, I do not judge. Finally, the quality build. This is the Battle Master. Able to use almost every weapon in the game, this build needs 40 vigor for the soft cap, 40 endurance for maximum stamina, 27 strength which turns into 40 when you two-hand your weapon, and 40 dex to reach the soft cap for dex weapon scaling. The vigor and endurance is the basic that we need for some good survivability. Then, 27 strength is enough because when we two-hand weapons, it acts as 40 strength, meaning that we can meet the requirements of most weapons and take advantage of extra damage scaling. The same for the 40 dex. We need to meet the requirements for as many weapons as possible. After that, you use whichever you prefer and take advantage of the scaling from both stats. This build is full-on melee and has no room for any spell casting. It is the true martial specialist. These are the basic levels that we are looking for in each of these ideas. So, by now, we make the assumption that we're going to soul level 120, and we have our list of possible build ideas. Next, we need to pick one. Please note, whichever one you pick, the process I will show you is the same for all of them. No matter what build you choose to make, the steps that I will show you to make it are always the same. That being said, I will pick one to run an example so that you may better understand how it works step by step. The build that I am about to make is one that I will personally run on my own first playthrough of Elden Ring. My dear viewer, to me, out of all of these options, there is one that is superior. I always run this on my first playthrough of every Souls game. Gentlemen, we are going to build Strength Faith. Specifically, I am going to run a Paladin type sword and board style Holy Knight, taking advantage of the new counterattack mechanic in order to study my opponents and punish their mistakes. All of this with the support of holy damage and health regeneration, creating a true tank that will increase my chances of survival. Hands down, this is my favorite type of build. Let's start by going back to our chart of the classes. The first thing we need to do is figure out which classes look to be the best for our idea. We're trying to make a Strength Faith build, so there are two stats that we're going to prioritize. We can see that the different classes that would benefit our idea are Hero and Vagabond for their high strength, as well as Confessor and Prophet for their high faith. Now that we have the basic stats that we want to end up with and the classes that would most likely fit our needs, the next step is to apply these stats to these classes. We first present each of the four classes: Hero, Vagabond, Confessor, and Prophet, with their starting stats, and we apply the end stats that we want. The same stats are applied to each of the four classes: 40 Vigor, 40 Endurance, 40 Strength, and 30 Faith. After this, we calculate how many levels it will take to go from the starting stats of each class until the end stats that we need. For example, in the Hero class, we need 26 Vigor to reach 40, 28 Endurance to reach 40, 24 Strength to reach 40, and 20 Faith to reach 30. In order to reach all of our desired stats, we need a total of 100 soul levels. Since the Hero starts at soul level 7, and we need 100 soul levels to reach the stats that we want, that means that, by the time that we finish the build, we will be at soul level 107. Taking into consideration that we are going to soul level 120, this means that we have 13 soul levels left over to use in any other stat that we need. We repeat this exact same process with each of the other classes. Vagabond requires 101 soul levels to reach our desired stats, and we would end up at soul level 110. Confessor needs 104 levels to reach the stats that we want, and we would end up at soul level 114. Finally, Prophet requires 104 levels to reach the stats that we need, and we would end up at soul level 111. As you can see, each class offers a different level of efficiency when it comes to making our build. From this information, we can understand a few things. First off, Confessor is the least efficient starting class for the build we want to make at this time. Ending at soul level 114 means that we only have 6 levels left to use on other stats. This is the lowest amount of leftover stats from any of these classes. Based on this, I can already tell you that I will not be using Confessor. On the other hand, Hero is the most efficient class to run this build. Ending at soul level 107, we have an extra 13 soul levels to put anywhere that we might need. This makes Hero a very good candidate for a starting class. That being said, While I admit that it is the most efficient, is it really the best? Vagabond and Prophet sit at an interesting middle ground. They are not the most efficient, nor are they the least, but both of these classes provide a fair ending soul level, giving us 10 extra levels in the Vagabond and 9 extra levels in the Prophet to use as we see fit. The Vagabond definitely works better as a melee character in the beginning, thanks to its high vigor and good combination of strength and dex. The Prophet, on the other hand, really leans more towards starting out as a caster with lower health and endurance. It might prove to be a bit harder to start out as a Prophet due to this reason. They have less health to make mistakes. Hero, Vagabond, and Prophet are all good choices to make a strength faith build. The one we pick really depends on what we're looking for. In my case, personally, while I am definitely going to go with strength weapon, it is important to note that we might need some extra levels in dexterity. It is not unusual to see some really good greatswords or ultra greatswords have a dexterity requirements in the teens, with 14, 16, or even 18 being common. Also, in my case, I am looking to start my first playthrough with a sword and board melee-oriented character and later on push into faith as I find miracles. Since I am looking for a class that has more weapon versatility and more survivability at the beginning, it begins to become clear that the class that would benefit me the most is the Vagabond. It is very important to look at starting equipment too. The Vagabond starts out with a longsword and a halberd, two really good weapons that are very compatible with each other in order to solve different problems. This is much better than the battle axe that the hero starts with or the spear that the Prophet has. In conclusion, I can tell you right now that my starting class for my first playthrough of Elden Ring will definitely be the Vagabond. Now that I have the build I want to make, Strength Faith, and the starting class that I will pick, the Vagabond, the next step is to establish a leveling path, so I will always know where to put my levels throughout the whole playthrough. Taking into consideration my objectives and the fact that I know very little about the challenges of Elden Ring, I would probably follow this level plan. My first priority would be to get Vigor and Endurance to 20 each. Then, I will prioritize Strength in order to be able to use more weapons and increase my damage with these weapons. I would dip a few points into Dex if I find a weapon that needs it. As I find miracles throughout my exploration, I will level up Faith as my third priority. I would focus on support spells like healing, shields, or regeneration. Once I feel comfortable with the damage that I am dealing, the fourth priority would be to level up Vigor and Endurance a bit more. I would probably look to get about 30 in each, at least, or even push it to 40 if I feel good about the damage that I am dealing. After this, I alternate between Strength and Faith depending on the requirements of the equipment that I find. With some luck and some patience, I should be able to maintain a steady increase of power that would allow me to never fall behind in the game. After that, it is all up to my own skill and determination. My dear viewer, you have just experienced my way of making builds. You have also seen an example of how I plan out a build that I will use for my first playthrough, by applying the theory of the game to the information that we have. That being said, please understand that this system is not set in stone. It is not perfect, but thanks to it, I now have a good idea of a build I am going to run, and how I am going to run it. This is one less thing to worry about while I'm playing the game, so I can focus on the experience and the different situations that I may find. I am that much more ready to tackle the challenges of the lands between, and so can you be if you choose to take the time to run the numbers. And with that, my dear viewer, we have reached the end. We have explained what a build is, we have learned how to make a build under different circumstances, and if you were willing to accept some spoilers, you have seen an example of how I make an optimized build for a game that we have not been able to play yet. This removes one thing that you have to think about while you experience the game for yourself. It also gives you a proper build, with proper tools, to help you tackle the different situations that the game will throw at you. As a whole, your chances of success will increase because you are that much more prepared. My way of doing things may not be the best, but I have found that it works for what I need. I hope that you're able to find something of use in this guide and that it makes your first experience with Elden Ring a little bit better. If Elden Ring will be your first Souls game, I wish you the best of luck. You're about to enter a beautiful kind of game that has been evolving for over a decade. I hope that in it you are able to find a new passion. On the other hand, if you're a veteran of the Souls, then feel free to add anything that you believe might be missing. I am always interested in reading the points of view of other Tarnished. In the end, we're here to get good, and we can do that much faster if we work together. Thank you very much for your time, and I hope I get to see you on the next one.